The NBA season is a few months away, but there are still tons of sports for you to get in the game and make your next bet with Sports Interaction. Bet before the game or live and play on all of your favorite teams' matchups. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN or download the app to get started. 19 plus, please play responsibly. Welcome to SDPN's off-season mini-series, The Leap, where I sit down with media members from across the NBA to discuss some of the up-and-coming players in the league that could take that next step in their careers. We discuss 6 players across 6 different teams, all with different styles and positions, in hopes of understanding what makes their development unique. Today, we're exploring the wondrous work of Spurs guard Devin Vassell, who became an elite shooter last season in San Antonio. Now, Vassell is going to be paired up with Victor Wembanyama, who should allow Vassell to explore different areas of his game, such as his playmaking, mid-range shooting, and his downhill game. Vassell has all the makings of a future all-star in this league, paired next to an enigmatic star like Victor Wembanyama. But the real question is, how is he going to take that next leap? All right, welcome back to another episode of The Leap. It is my off-season series dissecting and discussing a few different players around the NBA that I think can take that next step in their careers. And I'm joined by someone who is very, very close to the San Antonio Spurs, covers them very deeply, editor-in-chief of Alamo, Noah Magaro-George. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
That was perfect. That was perfect.
Hell yeah, yes.
First take, you got it, yeah.
I completely forgot to ask you about pronunciation beforehand, but hey, we're here. Look, I thank you so much for joining me. I've obviously been following you and kind of what you've been doing covering the San Antonio Spurs for the last couple of seasons. And I want to talk to you about Devin Vassell. I know when it comes to the Spurs, everybody's going to jump at the chance of discussing Wemby. There's going to be people who are excited about Sohan and Keldon Johnson, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Vassell is such an important part of everything moving forward with this team. He's entering year 4. He had a scoring leap last season, and I think just with the added usage, he really took advantage of being able to explore his scoring game more. Based on your impressions from the last 3 seasons, his first 3 seasons in the NBA, how much more do you think he can tap into offensively? And I'll mention some of the numbers after you go, but I kind of want to just get a general feel of where you're at with Devin Vassell so far.
For sure, and I'm really glad that we're going to get a chance here to give Vassell his flowers. He's one of my favorite players on this team, and honestly, I think he still has some untapped upside. I think he's a guy who, as you mentioned, maybe his first couple of years, I know that his self-created offense was only, about 20% of his total scoring. Yep. Last year, we saw that take a leap to almost 40%, which is a pretty massive leap for a player who, mostly was coming off dribble handoffs, off screens, catch and shoot in the corners. He really was starting to operate in the pick and roll as that secondary ball handler, getting to his spots patiently. He's not a guy with a ton of burst or anything like that, but he is someone who's so long. He really elevates on those jump shots. He's really patient. And he was really good. I don't think people, if you weren't watching the Spurs, which, hey, I don't blame people who weren't, right? They were a 22-win team a season ago. But before that injury, before he went down with the knee soreness that led to the arthroscopic knee surgery, he was 3rd in high volume, mid-range efficiency behind only Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant. That's it. Those are the only 2 guys, of the guys who were taking at least 5 mid-range shots a game. I think that speaks volumes to what he can do as a scorer. Now, does he have, a dynamic dribbling package? Is he super shifty? No, but I think he just understands how to get to his spots, and he was figuring out how to kind of leverage his mid-range scoring into getting to the rim. He was able to get to the rim a little bit more. Now, we saw an efficiency drop off a little bit as the season went on, especially after he came back from the surgery, which is to be expected, right? But I think he has a lot of untapped upside. I'm expecting maybe not a tremendous leap in terms of per game production. Obviously, Wemby's coming in. We're not sure what Sohan and Keldon are going to look like, or really what this group's going to look like together. But Vassell's that dude. I really like him. I don't know if he's, the best player on a championship team or anything like that, but I definitely think he can be a really serious cog in a team that is very competitive for a long time.
He's also important from an offensive diversity perspective because you mentioned the mid range shooting. The pull up shooting is something that he's gonna have to develop. But catch and shoot wise, he was 38% from three on 7 attempts in year three. Really good numbers for a catch and shoot player. He probably gets better and better with that as his career kind of progresses. And I think from a talent perspective offensively, him being able to, pairing him alongside a guy like Wemby is going to open up even more opportunities from his catch and shoot positions, whether it be a spot up position or it's getting downhill and being a pull up threat from mid range area. I think those are areas where he can really thrive. Now, I think this is where I want to ask you, like, how do you think Wemby might be able to open up his game, whether it be as a dribble handoff hub, whether it be as a guy who can be sort of, a spot up guy if Wemby gets doubled in the post to catch? Where do you think are some places that Vassell can sort of grow his game because of just the sheer presence of Wemby?
Absolutely. And I think, not to bring it to another player, but I think when we saw at Summer League, kind of with Malachi Branham, he's a guy who sort of like Vassell doesn't have a ton of burst. He kind of struggled to get to the rim at times last year, really focuses on or leans on his strength to kind of muscle his way to the rim a little bit. I think we could see like similar to what we saw with Malachi, where when he was running those pick and rolls, or I guess pick and pops with Wemby, guys still, even though Wemby wasn't super effective with Mets, 92 a season ago, they still really respected his gravity as a scorer, as a spot up shooter out for those pick and pop looks. And it created confusion, and it allowed Malachi to get downhill, get to the rim. And I think we'll see how teams adjust, how they want to play Wemby. But I think at least to start the season, I think it could really help him get to the rim. And I think another really underrated part of Wemby's game is his passing, like being that, playmaking hub from whether it's the top of the key, the elbows. He was really good at finding cutters, finding spot up shooters. And that's kind of the name of the game for Vassell. At least that's kind of what it had been for his rookie season, his second season. Obviously, he started exploring more self-creation in his third year, but I think those things can really open up his game, just the gravity that, Wembanyama has as a scorer. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that works. And I'm looking forward to see who gets these reps, as the primary ball handler. We saw Trey Jones get a lot of them last year. We saw Vassell take, I think, probably the next biggest share of the pie there. But once Vassell went down, we saw kind of Keldon move into that role where he's the guy who's taking the second most on-ball reps. And I just don't know what it looks like this season with Wembanyama, with Trey, with Sohan, with Vassell, with, Malachi even kind of taking a leap a little bit. So that'll be really interesting to kind of see what Pop does, because he's kind of gotten a, embarrassment of riches in terms of, young prospects on the roster right now.
Yeah, this podcast isn't about him, but I would really love some Dominic Barlow minutes.
My goodness.
He was awesome in Summer League. I was there watching him. It was incredible to see him. I mean, he just looked great. He looked like he was ready to be a rotation player in the NBA. So I'm excited to see what happens with him. Moving on to Vassell, I have some numbers here I'm going to throw out at you, and I want to see what sort of sticks out to you. 0.72 in ISO possessions, 1.35 points per possession in transition, 1.02 as the pick and roll ball handler, 0.96 on spot ups, 0.97 on dribble handoffs, 1.33 on cuts, and 0.72 off screens. Now I threw just a bunch of numbers at you there, but what's the one that sort of sticks out to you as maybe an area of growth and something that maybe he can sort of double down on with this new sort of roster construction?
Yeah, I think, we looked at, we listened to a lot of numbers right there. And I think for Vassell, maybe, and this isn't necessarily like an easy thing to do. It's not easy to just become a better shooter coming off screens or anything like that, but it would be nice to see him become a better shooter, better scorer, kind of coming off screens, off handoffs. Cause those numbers aren't great for him. Obviously, I think you said like 0.7 points per possession, something like that. He could really stand to work on that. We saw flashes of it throughout the season where, he's coming off screens, whether that's, like a double drag action or something like that, but he just didn't knock them down that well. He's mostly been like kind of a stationary shooter, a little bit of relocation there. He can kind of catch and shoot with momentum, in transition. As far as kind of being in a more positive sense, I think for him, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but just being able to capitalize on those spot up looks on the cuts, because I think those opportunities will be there for him. I think they will be there for him more than they were a season ago, because you look at the roster last year, not a lot of advantage creators on the roster, not a lot of guys who had a ton of gravity with the ball in their hands, not a lot of space, not a lot of great shooters. And Wembanyama is going to command attention, and he's got to take advantage of that. And I'm sure the Spurs will find a way to put that to good use for sure.
So you mentioned a couple things there. One is the cutting, which I thought was really interesting. 1.33 points per possession on cuts. And when you mentioned Wemby's gravity, the attention that Wemby is going to get, I think that is a huge thing. It also shows his willingness to be an off-ball mover, to actually cut, to move around on the court. And if you connect that with the shooting at some point in time in his career, there is promise there of him being an elite movement shooter, a guy who can run off multiple screens, catch the ball, moving, bang, right? It seems like that's the next natural progression for him as a player. And then after that, it's the playmaking, which I thought was very, very interesting as well. 1.02 points per possession as a pick and roll ball handler. He's out there creating looks for other guys. And I know that with Wemby, even with Sohan, guys like that who can sort of be that short roll playmaker for you, it's going to open up so much more. What have you seen from a playmaking perspective from Vassell, especially last season?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it, I think, at the very beginning where he didn't really have a lot of on-ball reps his first couple of years. He was mostly a spot-up guy, making his living in transition. Like you talked about, he was really efficient in transition as well. But he got a chance to have the ball in his hands. He was a guy who I think, again, he's really patient with the ball. He's, snaking screens. He's getting to his spots. And I think because he was so efficient as a mid-range scorer, he was able to, especially with drop coverage, kind of command the attention of two guys at once. The second he was seeing guys, whether it was a help defender coming over or saw an opening, he was able to kick it out. Like he wasn't making super advanced reads. He's not like skipping it to the corner. He's not really passing guys open. But I think just being able to make those simple reads where you see a guy's open from a man away, hitting that guy, I think that's something that we've seen from Vassell. And even looking at his per game numbers, I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but I think from his second season to last season, he went from maybe like 2 assists per game to close to 3.7 or 4, somewhere in that range. And I think that's a pretty big leap for a guy who, at least coming out of Florida State, I don't think a lot of people really expected that of Devin Vassell. I think they really just expected like a 3-and-D role player, a guy who's going to be able to contribute right away and just be sort of one of the glue guys to a competitive team. And I think he's shown that he can be more than that. So I'm really excited by the playmaking, and maybe we see him kind of take a leap. We saw Keldon take a small playmaking leap at the end of last season with more opportunity, but Vassell's an interesting case for sure. I think he's exceeded expectations for a lot of people, not just fans, but a lot of analysts as well.
Yeah. Pull-ups are going to be an interesting area of his game where he needs to sort of grow a little bit more. He shot 28.2% on pull-ups last season, but he takes a good chunk of pull-up shots. Where do you believe in that? Do you think that will eventually come? Is it necessary for him to reach whatever ceiling or that he's supposed to hit?
I don't know if it's necessary for him to be able to do that, because I think, at least from my perspective, having watched him the last 3 seasons, I was really high on him coming out of Florida State as well. I thought he might have a little bit of self-creation upside. Yeah. I think that's probably not realistic for him. I just think, I look at him like in terms of a pull-up score, I think he can do it from the mid-range for sure. I don't know about from 3. We really haven't seen him do it that much through his first 3 seasons. Even when he has done it, really hasn't been that efficient. And I think that's kind of like the next step, not to move on to a different topic. Obviously we're still on Vassell, but I think that's big for the Spurs, right? Finding a guy who can kind of space the floor, but not just as a catch and shoot threat, someone who can pull up, from 3. I think that's kind of an essential part to any, championship team. I think we've seen that with a lot of the teams that have been in the finals, whether that's a Jason Tatum or a Steph Curry or, any of those big name guys who have been in the finals, Jamal Murray as well. So I don't think he's that. I don't think he can do that, but I do think he's a guy who maybe has, maybe a couple all-star appearances in his future. I don't want to say perennial all-star, because I think to be that, you have to be really one of those every single, you have to be really special to do that. But I think, can he make an all-star team? Can he make 2 or 3 in his career? Sure. I think if things go right and the Spurs are winning games, for sure. But I don't think he can, I don't think he's like the best player on their team. I'm not sure he can even be, the second best player on a championship contending team. But I do think he is a guy who, if he added that, if that was added to his package, that would be huge.
It would change.
It would raise the ceiling completely.
Yeah. I look at what the final product of Vassell will be, and maybe I'm off here. You can tell me if I'm off or I'm completely wrong, but as sort of an evolved new age version of Klay Thompson. Now, I think like there are areas which Vassell is better earlier in his career, and there are areas where Vassell is worse. I think a big part of that equation, big part of the Klay equation here, as a guy who doesn't need a lot of on-ball reps to be able to create his own shot, guy who can be an off-ball mover, shooter, cutter, etc. Those are areas where Klay Thompson has thrived for the Warriors for years. That's something Vassell can lean on. But also there's the area of his game which I think Klay was good at very early on, which was the defensive side of the ball. Vassell has the length. Vassell has the ability. What have you seen from him defensively? Do you believe in that side of the ball? Do you think he can get better and be a legitimate defensive threat?
Yeah, I'll be completely honest with you here. I think last year he took a massive step back, whether that was because of the knee problem, also taking on a much bigger load offensively for a team that just wasn't very good. I think, if you're on a team that was quite literally the worst defensive team in NBA history, you're probably not doing too well on that end. Even if you are kind of pulling your weight, that's not enough. That's not enough. But prior season, especially going back to Florida State in his first couple of years in the NBA with the Spurs, I think he showed he can be like a real, I like to describe it as like a free safety of sorts, where you kind of let him drift off ball. You put him on the worst perimeter player, kind of let him wreak havoc in the passing lanes, dig on drivers, try to lodge the ball out from the nail, that sort of stuff. Just be a really elite help defender, be a guy who's a ball hawk, force turnovers. He's making progress as an on-ball defender. I think he's not quite as lanky as he used to be. He's added some muscle, some functional strength to his frame, but I think he has a chance to be really, really good on that end. I think maybe all defense. I was more bought in on the all defense kind of projections coming in. If he's going to have this much of a load on his shoulders, I'm not sure. But again, he's going to have Wembanyama, which obviously that makes everyone's life easier. So if he's making everyone's life easier, Vassell can kind of go back to what he was doing before. He can add more strength. He, has more experience. I think there's a real chance he could be an all defense guy. As far as the Klay Thompson comparison, I like that. I'll throw one out and I'll see what you think. I kind of see him in like a similar vein to Chris Middleton a little bit.
Okay. That was the second guy, by the way. I had two names and I wasn't sure which way to lean. So I like that you mentioned Middleton.
But I think he can be kind of somewhere in between those two players. Whereas, I think Chris Middleton has shown he can pull up from three, he can create for himself a little bit, not a little bit better, quite a lot bit better than, Vassell does right now. But I think, as far as the shooting goes, if he can be that guy who's willing to continue to, work off ball, thrive off ball, kind of accept that role where he doesn't really have a lot of those on ball reps, I think that really bodes well for his career. But again, I think it all hinges on, what do the Spurs do with Keldon Johnson? I think that's like the big question. Like, what do they do with him? Where does he fit in? Because depending on what they do with him, I think that opens a lot of opportunities for other players, and it kind of clears up their logjam, if you can have a logjam when you're coming off a 22 game win season. So it's an interesting problem to have, but a good problem to have too.
Yeah, I mean, look, having too much talent, too much young talent to have to try and develop is always a good problem to have. OKC is a huge example of this right now. You're looking at them, it's like they have 20 guys on the roster they have to deal with. How are they going to manage all of this? I think San Antonio, we talked about it a couple of podcasts ago, but San Antonio has the potential to get to that level. We mentioned the Dominic Barlows and Branhams of the world. Like there's a potential there for the development of these players to sort of be the forefront of whatever comes next with San Antonio. When it comes to Vassell, I'm very excited to see how he looks next season, particularly beside Wemby. And you brought up an interesting wrinkle of Keldon Johnson, because I think there is some overlapping skills there in terms of what they can and can't do. Do you see that as you mentioned it sort of as it being a good problem or a bad problem, but do you think Keldon is part of the longer term future of this? I'm sorry if that's a tough question, but
no. It's I like it. I like the question. I love the question because personally, I know, and I love Spurs fans to death. I wouldn't write about the Spurs. I wouldn't, dedicate my time to the Spurs if I didn't love Spurs fans, but Spurs fans have this habit, and I'm sure it's not just a Spurs specific thing, but every kind of first round pick that comes into this organization, it's like, he's the next guy. He's the next one up. He's the next, Tony, Tim, Manu, whatever, right. And I think because he was the leading scorer that people just automatically want to go, that's our guy. I don't see Keldon in that vein. I'm not sure the organization does. They're very tight-lipped about how they kind of see things. The only thing we know is Brian Wright before the draft was like, hey, we're not trading Vassell. We're not trading Keldon. We're going to see what we can do with these guys with Wembanyama. We'll evaluate. Then we will make decisions. But if I have to be honest, if I was the Spurs, I would probably lean towards moving away from Keldon. I love Keldon, great human being, has already exceeded expectations as a guy who went 29th in the draft. Yeah. You know, there's no work ethic problems there. He is a hard worker. He's in the gym all the time, but really rudimentary playmaker. His bread and butter is slashing, right? He's just a really physical bruiser, bully you to the rim, but he doesn't finish well at the rim. Like if that's your main thing, if that's your bread and butter and you're not efficient doing it,
right?
What else do you bring to the table? Because he's not a good mid-range shooter. For his career, he shoots just a hair over 30% from mid-range and almost never ventures there. It's not a pull-up shooter from three. He's a stationary shooter pretty much strictly. Like he's not really shooting threes in transition. He's not coming off screens. He's not coming off handoffs. He's not really doing anything but catching and shooting. And last year, obviously, we're spacing, more attention on him. Huge dip in the 3-point percentage. And I think one of the things with Keldon is if he can't be a really, really good spot-up shooter, what does he bring to the table? Because he's a terrible defender.
Right.
Has been awful, pretty much since he came into the league. And I'm just not sure what you do with him. Like, I love that he led the team in scoring. I love his energy, his attitude, his leadership, but I just don't know what you do with him. And I kind of think he's the odd man out. I wouldn't be surprised if he's gone by the end of the season, but it's up to the Spurs. It's going to be, really what do they want to do? What do they want to do? So we'll see.
Yeah. So that's fascinating to me because I think like with the Spurs situation it's trying to battle patience versus figuring out like what you have. And we mentioned all of these prospects, right? We think about Wemby and what he might be. Playing the wait and see game is completely fair because you don't really know what you have right now. And I think from a front office perspective, doing that makes a ton of sense. But at some point, in the next couple of seasons, you have to start making some decisions to whether you want to not necessarily consolidate because I don't think the Spurs are at that point yet, but like being able to really find something that maybe meshes more with your team, depending on whatever that is. Keldon Johnson, going to be a very interesting situation. Devin Vassell, also a very interesting situation with what might happen next season and how he might work with Wemby. I guess I'll ask this to finalize this conversation. What does a leap look like for Vassell next season to you?
I think a leap for Vassell next season is mostly an efficiency leap. I don't necessarily need to see him doing anything extra on the court. I don't want to see him like necessarily trying new things. Of course, I'm fine for him to try new things. They're still in the rebuilding phase, but I just want to see him with the things that he experimented with this season. I want to see that he worked on it during the offseason, that he really put in the hours to get better at those things. And I want to see the efficiency rise because I think you look at his career, from here, I think from his rookie season to now, I think he shoots about 43 or so % from the field. Like that's pretty well below league average. I'd love to see like an efficiency jump for him to get better at the things he's already doing and kind of improve in the areas that we talked about that we've seen him try. We've seen flashes, but let's turn those flashes into consistent production. Like that is a real part of your repertoire. So I think for me, that would be the leap for Vassell, but I'm kind of curious too. And I'll throw it back to you. What would it look like for you? Because I think, these things don't necessarily look the same to everybody.
Yeah, I think the efficiency is an important part. And I actually think the efficiency is something that will get there because you mentioned Wemby's gravity. That just opens up so much more. Spacing is such an important part of the NBA today. And like having someone with rolling gravity, with just gravity in the post is going to open up so much for him on downhill drives. He's going to be able to pull up in the mid-range. He's done a good job of that so far into his career. He's going to have more opportunities as a dribble handoff guy, as a pick and roll ball handler. The one area I think I'm very interested in is the playmaking because last year from the Spurs games that I've watched, and again, like you said, it's not like there were tons of games where you had to tune into, but from the Spurs games I watched, I was really interested in Vassell's playmaking. The fact that he was able to, in pick and rolls, make certain types of reads, be able to, as a dribble handoff hub, like get the help and then kick. Like it's very simple stuff, but that's the type of things that will open up his repertoire even more. Very interested in the playmaking. That's the area where I just it stands out to me. Noah, appreciate you so much. Editor-in-chief, my guy. Anything you have coming up, anything you got going on over the next couple of months Spurs-wise to let the people know?
Yeah, for sure. First off, thank you so much for having me. I had a blast talking basketball with you. I hope we can do this again sometime soon. But really just, I guess, keep on the lookout for the stuff that we're doing over at Alamo. We got a lot of good writers there. We're trying to, keep Spurs fans up to date with like all the latest news, analysis, break down players. I know it's the dead part of the off season, but we're really trying to, get as great a content as we can out there. But other than that, really just, enjoying the summer, getting ready for the next season, getting ready to get married. And just life is great right now.
Life is great.
So thank you so much for having me, man. Really appreciate you.
I love it. Absolutely. Listen, we definitely have to have you on the pod at some point to discuss Wemby once the season starts and once we get a couple of games in, because I think the whole NBA world is going to have its attention in San Antonio, Texas, watching. Very, very. I mean, that's just, it comes with the territory now, right? And it's incredible to see. I'm very excited. Noah, you do incredible work. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to this episode of the off-season series, The Leap. Yes, tap into Noah's work on the San Antonio Spurs. He does incredible stuff. Take care. Have a good one.